67.7 million passengers. That is how many people passed through Changi Airport in 2024. Award ceremonies, waterfalls inside departure halls, butterfly gardens between gates, a shopping mall that doubles as one of Asia's most photographed landmarks. On paper, Singapore's tourism machine looks invincible. The numbers are record-breaking. The headlines are triumphant. But here is what nobody is telling you. In 2020, that same machine, the one celebrated on 1,000 travel magazine covers, the one that had won more than 660 international awards, collapsed almost completely overnight. Not slowly. Not in stages. Overnight. And the story of how it happened, why it was always going to happen, and what the quiet signals say about what could happen again, that story is worth every minute of your attention. Because Singapore did not just survive a tourism catastrophe. It survived a catastrophe that exposed something far more dangerous than a virus. It exposed a structural fragility built into the very DNA of this city-state's economic identity. And that fragility has not gone away. It has simply been papered over with award plaques and passenger records while the forces threatening to unravel it grow stronger by the year. This is that story. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what was built. Singapore in 1965 was a city that had just been expelled from Malaysia. It had no natural resources, no oil, no agricultural land to speak of, no obvious reason to exist as an independent nation-state in a region where every neighbor was physically larger. What it had was a harbor and a leader named Lee Kuan Yew, who understood that geography could be turned into destiny if you were disciplined enough, strategic enough, and absolutely relentless enough to execute. The idea was simple. Singapore would become the connector, the in-between place, the transit point that linked east and west, the gateway through which goods, capital, and eventually people would flow. You did not need to be rich in resources if you sat at the crossroads of the world's most important trade routes. You just needed to be indispensable. By the time Changi Airport opened in 1981, Singapore had already figured out the playbook. The airport was not just an airport. It was a statement. From day one, it operated with a clarity of purpose that most countries never achieve for their national infrastructure. It was designed to be the best connecting hub in the world. Not the biggest, the best. And for 4 decades, it was exactly that. By the 2010s, Changi had become something genuinely extraordinary in the history of aviation. It had won the Skytrax World's Best Airport Award so many times that industry observers stopped being surprised and started being quietly unsettled. How do you compete with perfection? Passengers connecting through Changi did not experience an airport the way most people understand airports. It had orchid gardens, movie theaters, a rooftop swimming pool, a sunflower garden, a cactus garden, and a social tree that lit up. And then in 2019, they built Jewel. If Changi was Singapore's crown jewel, Jewel was the crown jewel of the crown jewel, a 10-story mixed-use complex connected directly to Terminal 1. It opened in April 2019. Within months, it was attracting visitors who had no intention of flying anywhere. Featuring a 40-meter indoor waterfall, the tallest in the world, cascading through a glass and steel dome filled with more than 2,000 trees and plants representing 120 species, people were coming to Changi simply to be there. Singapore's international visitor arrivals in 2019 reached 19.1 million people. Tourism receipts hit 27.7 billion Singapore dollars. The country was running a near-perfect tourism operation. High-value visitors. World-class infrastructure. Everything was working. Everything was calibrated. And then, just 11 months after Jewel opened, it all collapsed. Singapore detected its first COVID-19 case in January 2020. Within weeks, the country that had spent 4 decades becoming the world's most indispensable transit point became one of the world's most tightly controlled borders. Circuit breakers. Travel restrictions. Contact tracing systems among the most sophisticated on Earth. Singapore did what Singapore does, it executed. But there is a brutal arithmetic at the heart of what happened next. If your entire tourism model is built on being the connector, the in-between, place that links the world, then a global pandemic that eliminates international travel does not just hurt your tourism sector. It eliminates it. International visitor arrivals collapsed from 19.1 million to just 2.74 million. An 85.7% drop. Not a downturn. Not a recession. An obliteration. Tourism receipts fell from 27.7 billion to 4.8 billion Singapore dollars. Marina Bay Sands and Resorts World Sentosa became ghost towns. Orchard Road saw footfall collapse. Hotels that once ran above 80% occupancy dropped to single digits. Changi Airport, which had processed nearly 68 million passengers annually, fell to fewer than 12 million. And even that number was inflated by essential travel and repatriation flights. The airport that had won hundreds of awards became a vast, silent monument to a model of connectivity that had suddenly become irrelevant. The waterfall kept running. There was almost no one to watch it. What happened next is where the story becomes more complicated. Because Singapore's response was, by any objective measure, brilliant. The government moved fast. Emergency support packages ran into the billions. Jobs were preserved. Singapore Airlines received a massive recapitalization. The entire aviation ecosystem was kept alive. And when the world reopened, Singapore was ready. The Vaccinated Travel Lane program in 2021 positioned it as a leader in reopening. By 2022, tourism began returning. By 2023, it accelerated. By 2024, arrivals reached 16.5 million, and tourism receipts hit a record 29.8 billion Singapore dollars, higher than before the pandemic. The narrative was clear: Singapore had bounced back. But look closer, and a different story emerges. Overnight visitors in 2024 still had not returned to 2019 levels. More people were spending more money, but fewer were staying. Singapore's strategy had shifted toward high-value tourism, fewer visitors, higher spending. It makes sense for a small, expensive city. But it creates a vulnerability. High-spending leisure travelers are the first to disappear during economic uncertainty. And global uncertainty is rising. Inflation, interest rates, and geopolitical tensions are already shaping travel decisions. Hotel prices have surged. Costs are rising. Even Singaporeans themselves are traveling less. And if locals are cutting back, so are international visitors. At the same time, a deeper structural shift is underway. Advances in ultra-long-range aircraft mean airlines can increasingly bypass Singapore altogether. Routes that once required a stop now go direct. Gulf hubs like Dubai and Doha have already captured significant transfer traffic. Singapore's greatest strength, being the indispensable connector, is slowly becoming optional. There is another challenge. Singapore has positioned itself as a premium destination built on events, infrastructure, and efficiency. But that model requires constant reinvestment. Concerts, global events, exhibitions, these are not permanent advantages. They move. They rotate. When they leave, what remains is a destination that is exceptional for business and transit, but increasingly expensive for leisure. Even its famous hawker culture is evolving, sometimes losing the affordability that made it iconic. At the same time, subtle signs of strain are appearing domestically. Rising costs. Concerns about overcrowding. Early signals of the tensions seen in other global tourist cities. Step back, and the picture becomes clear. Singapore's tourism sector is not failing. It is still one of the most successful in the world. But it is also more exposed than the headline numbers suggest. The collapse of 2020 was not just a crisis. It was a warning. A demonstration of what happens when the conditions that make Singapore's model work suddenly disappear. Those conditions are changing again, more slowly this time, but just as surely. Technology, competition, and economic pressure are reshaping global travel. The waterfall at Jewel is still running. Passenger numbers are strong. Awards are still being won. But the underlying questions remain. Is Singapore's tourism model resilient enough to withstand the next global shock? Or is it still built on conditions that can disappear overnight? Because in Singapore, deferred problems do not vanish. They wait.